Hello there. Accept warm regards from the entire production team which joins me, Samson Websey, in Yaoundé to welcome all of you to another edition of Political Focus. The bloody conflict in the northwest and southwest regions has for some time now been the talking point in Cameroon and elsewhere out of the country. The general outcry and wish are for peace to return to the two regions for the population to resume their normal lives and normal activities. Proposals and counter-proposals have been and are being made towards ending the bloodletting, deaths and material losses that are now marking some of the worst chapters of Cameroon's post-independence and reunification political history. Amidst the near cacophony of voices and proposals on the way forward, each party in the conflict seems to be pulling the blankets to its own side, throwing opprobrium, as it were, against the opposing side for being responsible for the escalation of the violence in the northwest and southwest regions. In fact, the noise of the accusations and counter-accusations appear to have either muffled or simply overshadowed the wise counsel of the few experts in conflict management, conflict transformation and conflict resolution who have spoken this far. Yet we all know that when things get as bad as they are becoming now, it doesn't make any sense to play the blame game. That is why the more one thinks about the current deadlock, the more one admires the work of firefighters. For whenever there is a fire outbreak, firefighters don't go asking who started the fire, but rather they first put out the fire before trying to know how it all came about. After all, it will be like crying over spilled milk if we waited only to lock the store when all the animals had long gone. Stay tuned, I will be right back. You are welcome back. Let's refresh our memories on the main political news events of the week as reported by the newspapers. Sam Bukuba read the newspapers and prepared the following review for us.
The Post newspaper reports that an anti-beer protest turned violent in Geneva, Switzerland. Mutation publishes color pictures of the showdown between two groups calling themselves Anti-Sardina and Anti-Tontina, with a report of what it terms a crazy day in the Swiss capital. Echoes of Switzerland is the banner headline in Eden newspaper, with the riders' Anglophone dialogue hopes and Cameroon's lining on Geneva streets. Le Gideon also headlines that story, saying Switzerland complains over attack on a Swiss journalist. Meanwhile, Cameroon Tribune says following the attempted demonstration prevented by the police in Geneva, the government, through the Minister of Communication, René Emmanuel Sadi, has expressed total indignation in the face of acts which tarnish the image of Cameroon. The Post reports what it calls the inside story of Frunde's captivity and release, citing the SDF chairman as saying his encounter with the Amber Boys was nasty and hostile. Similarly, Frunde recounts ordeal in the hands of abductors is how the Sun headlines the story. The paper reports that the SDF chieftain condemned the kidnappings and burnings, albeit admitting there is an Anglophone problem, but that separatists should not commit more errors that the population are facing. And the Rambler's banner headline reads, "Separation forces are destroying their own people and the economy." The socio-political crisis in the northwest and southwest was on the agenda of an audience Prime Minister John Gute granted a delegation of 7 U.S. congressmen and women led by Karen Bass, reports Cameroon Tribune. The Post quotes Cameroon's Defense Minister Betty Assomo Joseph as telling the U.S. Congress delegation that 300 troops have been killed since the start of the crisis in the northwest and southwest. The Post reports that SDF MPs have renounced the National Assembly bill creating Cameroon's Human Rights Commission because of what it termed grave human rights violations and crimes against humanity perpetrated on the people in the English-speaking regions of the country. But Mutation says the president of the National Commission on Human Rights and Freedoms, Dr. Chemuta Divine Banda, has hailed the bill, which, according to him, will put in place a mechanism for the prevention of torture in Cameroon. Well, that was our political press review for the week. Over to you, Samson.
Sam Bukuba with our press review. Cameroonians from across the board have for several months now been yearning for a quick end to the disturbing violent conflict in the northwest and southwest regions. Ever since the conflict took a turn for the worst, several lives have been lost, many people wounded, property destroyed, all resulting in an ever-increasing number of internally displaced persons and refugees. But unfortunately, different measures taken to resolve the conflict this far have only yielded little positive results. Perhaps it was high time we turned to experts in matters of peace and conflict to help us out. One of them is Dr. Arrey William, a senior lecturer of peace and conflict studies at the Protestant University of Central Africa in Yaoundé. You're welcome, Doctor.
Thank you very much.
I am being joined here in the studio by Charles Tembe. How can we define conflict between human beings?
I will first of all like to say that conflict can mean different things to different people. The first thing I would like us to understand is that conflict is, first of all, a disagreement between people, between groups. It's also what we can call incompatibility of goals. When people or groups pursue mutually incompatible goals, then we can say that there is conflict. But what is important to note is that conflict is part and parcel of human coexistence. It's an integral part of human coexistence and social interaction, which means that we can really not avoid conflict. It is part of us.
So it means every time there is a human community, there's bound to be conflict from time to time.
I can even say it's normal in the society. What makes it a problem is simply the fact that when conflict occurs, because many people don't understand that it is normal in human society, some approach it in a violent way because they perceive it as something negative. But as a specialist in the field, I wouldn't see conflict as something negative. Of course, it can even be positive depending on how we handle it.
You've talked about conflict as something normal in the society. What explains the fact that some conflicts degenerate into violence?
Yes, I said conflict is normal in the society, and that conflict is not bad in itself. It's not a bad thing in itself. What will make it bad is when it degenerates into violence. And one of the reasons why conflict will degenerate into violence is when it is poorly managed. It is poorly handled. It's handled in a destructive way because every conflict has got a positive and a negative side. At times we fail to figure out the positive aspect. We only see like the negative aspect. That is why at times people approach it violently instead of looking for non-violent possibilities of approaching the situation.
What will you say would be some of the ways of dealing with violent conflict?
Violent conflict, the fact is, here the conflict has already escalated.
That's right.
We are now living in violence. The most important thing is how can we bring these conflicting parties who are already involved in violence to talk about these issues. It is not that easy. And there is also lack of trust, lack of confidence. But I think the key thing is, first of all, through negotiation. It is not obligatory. Negotiation is voluntary. And we should have something that ties us together. If not, I can cause trouble to you and say, what can you do to me? But now, when I know, for example, in a family relationship, you are in a conflict with your wife, you are bound to resolve it because of the kind of relationship that you have. So the first thing to think about is how you can negotiate among or between yourself. But sometimes the conflict can escalate so much so that communication is even broken, where people begin to see each other as a kind of enemy. Then it becomes difficult to negotiate between yourself or among yourself.
Yes, I was going to ask you, when should both parties in a belligerent situation stop to negotiate? Can they on their own decide to say, now we stop, I will go to the negotiation table, or there must be a third party that will come and tell them, please stop and negotiate?
It all depends. Sometimes between the belligerents, they can get involved into what we call conflict fatigue. They are tired. They see that this conflict is not taking us anywhere. There's sometimes an attitude of pride, arrogance even. But you yourself, you have noticed that this thing is not taking us anywhere. In which case, you get tired of it. Both parties at some point, they can just get tired of it. And they really want to discuss about it. They really want to dialogue. But because of this arrogance, pride, and so on, in that case, we'll be talking about a third party because there is just total lack of trust, no confidence. So we need a third party who will come now with a certain neutral stance as a facilitator to facilitate the dialogue.
We have been hearing about the notion of dialogue. We have been hearing about mediation. We have been hearing so many terms that are coming up. Which is which?
There are so many terms. You've talked about dialogue, mediation, negotiation. I think I will start with negotiation, which is the ability of both parties to jointly find a solution to their conflict without any intervention of a certain third party. But now at some point, because of the fact that they are not able to communicate, there is that communication breakdown. They are looking at each other as a kind of enemy. There is what we call dehumanization. So in which case now we say we need a third party. That third party now could be a mediator. It could be an external somebody, or like the case of Cameroon, even somebody within the country, or externally. It all depends. Who would then come now? We believe that this third party, this mediator, could be more objective, could be neutral, and so on. For example, we are talking about our case, the conflict in the Northwest and the Southwest. Through the help of a facilitator or a mediator, the various parties come together to dialogue. This dialogue is not a matter of who is stronger, but we are prepared to listen to each other, to be empathetic, to consider each other, and what are the issues to talk about. Are we going to be talking about, in quotes, form of the state? Are we going to be talking about federalism, decentralization, or again, secession?
What would be the quality of a good mediator?
I think the first thing is that all the conflict parties must accept the person as their mediator. If not, they wouldn't feel confident. So the next thing also is that the mediator has to be objective in his approach. The mediator should be skillful, critical, objective, be able to analyze the conflict situation and understand it, and shouldn't take sides. There shouldn't be any bias. It should be as neutral as possible, objective as possible. And one key thing is that he is not imposing a solution on the people. What the mediator is doing is simply that he's facilitating the process for the people to look for their own solution to the conflict. So the solution doesn't belong to the mediator. It belongs to the conflicting parties.
You mentioned the case of Cameroon. What would you say are some of the intricacies in the conflict in the Northwest and Southwest regions of Cameroon now?
I want to say that this conflict at this time is actually a complex one. It has escalated to... Right now, we are not using the term conflict anymore because the conflict has escalated into violence, and now what we are using now is more of crisis. We are no longer talking about managing the conflict, because when we talk about managing the conflict, we are avoiding it from escalating into violence. But now, the conflict has already escalated into violence, and it is now at the peak. That's the level of crisis.
What's the difference between a conflict situation and a crisis situation?
A conflict is a normal thing in human coexistence. It can occur, and we look for a means to resolve our conflict. But now, a crisis situation, it has gone up beyond the conflict. The conflict itself is not a problem. The problem is now with the crisis that the conflict has caused as a result of probably poor management. You see, people are being killed. People are being kidnapped. Nobody understands what is going on. This is a crisis. It's getting complex, and that is why you hear to talk more of crisis management. We'll no longer talk about conflict management, but crisis management. Here at this point, we'll be talking more about crisis diplomacy, no longer preventive diplomacy.
You've said this conflict in the Northwest and Southwest is a complex one. Does it mean there's no way, a way of resolving the conflict through non-violence?
Saying that it's a complex one is simply to say that it has escalated so much so that even the government, even the people don't know how to go about it. There are so many parties that are now involved and there are so many causes now. The conflict started as a simple, peaceful protest. But after that, we saw the dynamics of the conflict and many more causes coming in, even when the government was even trying to meet some of the demands. More other demands were coming up. More causes, more actors. The causes are increasing. The actors are increasing. And the dynamics, somehow, were at a certain level of crisis. What should we do? At some point, it was as if some groups could really not accept the fact that there is conflict. But we are fine now somehow with this conflict situation because all the parties or both parties now recognize that there is a problem to the point where both parties also recognize the fact that the solution is with genuine dialogue, inclusive dialogue. Again, there is another problem at the level of the dialogue. How is the dialogue going to be organized? What are the terms of the dialogue? Who is going to be involved? What is going to be discussed?
You've used an expression there, genuine dialogue.
Yes.
Inclusive dialogue.
Yes.
Can you define those adjectives?
Yes. When we say genuine, one of the things is that when there is that loss of trust, when I look at my opponent, I say, this guy, I cannot trust what he's saying. So what we are saying here, genuine, is that we should mean it. When we say we want to dialogue, we want to discuss about this thing, it means we should really mean it. It's not a show. We should be genuine. So when now we talk about inclusive, is that all the key stakeholders have to be included. In conflict analysis, we talk about conflict mapping. We have to map the stakeholders. When we talk about the stakeholders, we have the direct stakeholders and we have the indirect stakeholders. That's the direct conflict party. We should be able to map them out. Who now are the indirect stakeholders who have a stake in the conflict in one way or another? We also have to map them out. And all these people are the people that have to sit down and dialogue about these things.
When a conflict breaks out, we have a group of people or we have some individuals who draw benefit from it and will not want it to end.
Yes.
Do you see that happening with the conflict in the Northwest and Southwest regions?
Yeah, what is clear is that in some conflict, and even in most conflict, there are certain stakeholders we call generally in conflict studies conflict entrepreneurs or war entrepreneurs. And I will start by asking, what is the meaning of entrepreneur in business? What is the objective of a business entrepreneur? Is to make money. And it's the same thing with conflict or war entrepreneur, is to make money or profit out of the conflict or the war situation. So more or less, they are living on the situation. And if you are living on the situation, of course, what is automatic is that you will be against anything that resembles resolution, dialogue to fix the issue. That's what most of the time we call them spoilers. They spoil the peace process. They are there somewhere. They are watching what is happening. And in this our case, in the Northwest and Southwest, certainly we have spoilers, which we call war entrepreneurs. But I don't think I'm in the position to identify the war entrepreneurs.
Probably not identify, but categorize them. Categories of these kinds of war entrepreneurs.
The war entrepreneurs, it will all depend. We can have even those that fall within some kind of ethnic mobilization.
That's
right?
one category?
That's the category. And what they are doing, they are trying to mobilize their people more or less for their own self-political interest. But their people look at it as if this man is fighting for us. They can use all kinds of strategies. They can use propaganda. They can use hate speech. They can use all sort of techniques to make their people understand that the opponent is a demon. Dehumanizing the opponent because they want to gain from the conflict situation, and they can use this issue of identity. But some others, it could be just the fact that they are out to make money out of the situation.
Those are involved in conflict paraphernalia, guns,
manufacturing and selling guns and so on and so forth. This is another category. Another category could also be those that are against the regime in place. It could be a foreign government against a current regime in another country. And they can use their strategies. They can pass through the people themselves to destabilize the current regime in place because somehow they have already strategized and they know if this man is destabilized, is no longer there, this is what is going to happen. And those people somehow are being motivated, telling them, if you succeed, for example, you will be general, you will be prime minister, you will be, and people are motivated. And in this case, in the Northwest and Southwest, it resembles something like that. Because when you see the kind of zeal, the kind of ideology, the kind of enthusiasm that some of these brothers now call secessionists or terrorists or whatsoever, but I will call them non-state armed groups.
Why do you prefer to call them non-state armed groups? Or you will not directly use the word secessionist or terrorist?
I am using this because the Northwest-Southwest case is different from the Boko Haram case. And the Boko Haram case, it is clear that we are sitting quietly in our own house, and a foreigner comes and imposes war on us, and not any kind of foreigner, a foreigner that we cannot easily identify even, using terror and so on. And in that case, they are terrorists. But again, this situation of Northwest-Southwest is like we are still in our house, in our family. The father is there, the mother is there, and the children are there, and all of a sudden, some two children decide that they are not happy with the way the house is functioning. They decide to disobey their parents. Are you, as a father or as a mother, going to call your children, your sons or your daughters, terrorists? You may be angry that this kind of behavior is not acceptable, but calling them that way
it may cause radicalization.
It may cause. So that is why I prefer to use non-state armed groups. Because by the time you call somebody a terrorist, even if it's not a terrorist, say, maybe this thing is good to try.
Do you have the impression that it is a category we missed out on? I'm talking about those people who are sent to the field to manage conflict, and they are given huge resources to manage these conflicts, and some of them make capital gains from these resources. They are part of the conflict
entrepreneurs,
right?
Yes, I would say that. So that is why I will classify, if you have this kind of attitude, if you are sent to the field to help manage the situation and you mastermind it in that kind of way, then you can also be categorized as a war entrepreneur. You are gaining from the situation. And whatever thing that you may be doing, you are simply pretending. It's just out of hypocrisy that I want this conflict to be resolved. You'll be talking about peace without actually working for peace.
Doctor, you've studied conflicts, how they've occurred in different parts of Africa and different parts of the world. Is there any similarity between the conflict in the Northwest and Southwest regions to any conflict you've seen anywhere in the world?
I think that there are a number of conflicts in Africa, in places like Liberia, Libya, Mali, Central African Republic. We have seen cases where conflict maybe started just out of maybe religious differences, ethnic differences, and then poorly managed and escalated to the point where people have to pick up arms. We have also seen cases in some of these countries where the authorities in place immediately categorize these ones as terrorists and not really giving room to dialogue with these terrorists and so on. And we have also seen where, before you know it, some of these non-state armed groups tend to control large territories around the peripheries of the country. The time you are spending to say, I am not going to dialogue with him, that time the conflict is growing, because conflict has a life, just like you and I have a life. They call it conflict life cycle. When conflict emerges, it starts to grow. And if you manage it badly, then it will give you the negative effect, the destructive effect. If you manage it well, then you will see the potential benefits. So the conflict in Northwest and Southwest resemble many other conflicts that I have cited here.
Now that we have so many actors, so many stakeholders, so many people who have interest in the conflict continuing, where do we go from here?
That is the more reason why I told you that it is unfortunate that we allowed this conflict to get to this level. That is why I use the term complex. I can even say protracted, because there are just so many issues now that we don't know exactly where to touch, what to touch to fix this issue. But I am still saying that no matter the number of stakeholders, it is still possible to come out of this trouble if all of these stakeholders can believe in dialogue and reject violence. It is still possible.
What would be some of the first things you would think that should be done in terms of managing it so that we come out of the traumatic negative effects?
Like I said, this conflict has already escalated so highly. In peace studies, we talk about preventive diplomacy, or again, light diplomacy, when we are struggling to still prevent the negative effect of a conflict situation. But right now, we have already experienced and we keep experiencing the negative effect. So what strategy we use is what is called deep diplomacy. Some people call it developmental diplomacy, which means that you have to not only touch the superficial elements or factors or immediate causes, you have to dig deep into the matter. Because when, for example, we say that people should drop down their arms, it will be difficult if they are not convinced that the agenda of the proposed dialogue somehow addresses the deep-rooted factors that cause them to pick up arms in the first place. So that's why I'm talking about deep diplomacy. Some people even call it wartime diplomacy. We are now finding a kind of wartime diplomacy. And all these things have to be taken into account and even move beyond that to address issues of, for example, exclusion, because some groups felt that maybe they are excluded from the national cake. And today, in our country, people are talking about living together. And I want to let you people know that we have never had a problem of living together as Cameroonians. Whether we are Anglophones or Francophones or Bamileke or Bassa or whatever, we have never had a problem of living together. The problem we are having is that of eating together.
Now, you talk about deep diplomacy. Somebody went out and started setting the agenda. And doing this deep diplomacy that you're talking about, he said that he's going to examine everything except this. And there was big evolution of hope that finally we're coming to talking terms.
But, like I say, there are lots of intricacies in conflict management. If somebody said that, I wouldn't say that the person did not know what they were saying. The person was simply certainly passing on a message that we are ready to discuss about everything except this. Unfortunately, in practical conflict management, what makes a dialogue genuine is when we allow all those people with their various positions to come to the negotiation table and let's talk about it. If you say you believe in federalism, no problem. Come, let's talk about it. But there shouldn't be any prejudice. This implies that one may be imposing their own idea, their own agenda on the other party. And in that case, the other party might see it as a kind of using force on him or her. And then that party also is saying, okay, I'm going to maintain my position. But when we talk about dialogue, when we talk about negotiation and so on, is that please come. We have our different perspectives. We have our different positions. Let's talk about it. What makes this conflict situation really, really difficult? One of the reasons is because the conflict parties are still so stiff at the level of their various positions. There is no way we'll be able to resolve this conflict if we are not able to shift from our original position, which we call in conflict management compromise. In which case, if we move beyond position to interest, then we are already moving towards resolution. So long as we've not been able to move a bit away from the position and to talk about the interest. So if they ask you, you want to separate, why do you want to separate? How is that going to help you? And so on. If you say you don't want to separate, why don't you want to separate? Why do you want to stay united? And then we are already moving to the interest. And we will say that at some point, it could be possible to resolve our differences without necessarily continuing to kill one another.
The most worrying situation at the moment is the fighting that is going on. Almost everyone thinks that the fighting should stop at some moment for this dialogue to take place. How can this fighting be stopped?
What is clear is that we are talking about dialogue and so on, but without a certain conducive environment, it is going to be difficult. So the key stakeholders or the authorities, and I will even say the government, have to be able to create that space for dialogue. And one of the ways of creating that space is to think about those, for example, in prison. As a result of this, is there something that can be done? Think about those young guys who are living on their guns, which now we want them to drop. What are we going to replace? Is it just a matter of capacity building? Is that enough? I'm just asking. Or there is something beyond that. In some other places, some people will use cash for arms. Some people will use development for arms. But in our case here, somehow, I think we are at the level of capacity building for arms. capacity building that will enable some of these guys who are carrying them, that when they drop them down, they build their capacity, they reintegrate them into the society. And now, because more or less most of them were jobless, now they will be able to find a job and so on. So I think that environment needs to be created.
We observe that the diaspora is a very sticky element in stopping the fighting and maybe opening the way for dialogue. What should be done about the diaspora in this matter? What should be their role in looking for a solution to this problem?
Especially as they do have a stake, because we understand that some of them are teleguiding and they give instructions and those instructions are followed. We have the belief that if they were to give contrary instructions, like, okay, now let's lay down our weapons and listen.
Yes, I want to say that as far as this crisis is concerned in the Northwest and Southwest, the diaspora has played a very central role and a very powerful role. They are a key stakeholder. There is nothing we can do as far as this crisis is concerned to manage it constructively, peacefully, without involving the diaspora community, especially the leaders of some of these groups. When you talk about diaspora, of course, we have some. I'm not saying that they are not responsible. We have some responsible Cameroonian diaspora. But then we also have others who have their ideologies and who have their aims, who have their, in quotes, it could also be selfish ambitions, selfish interests. They have their means to make that happen. So it is not a matter of going to maybe France, going to Germany, going to Belgium, going to Canada, and say, oh, all of you Cameroonian diaspora, come, let's talk. We have to be able to map out. That's talk of conflict mapping. Wherever you are hiding. We know there is a guy in America. How can we talk with this guy? So the diaspora, especially the leaders of some of these armed groups, we cannot really be successful in resolving this conflict without seeing how to involve them. They have a central role to play.
What should be done now at this particular moment to stop the violence and then get on to talking?
What is important for us now is that all of us have accepted that there is a problem and that let's look for the solution. And I can say that the majority of us have said the solution revolves around genuine and inclusive dialogue. There are certain conditions to enable this genuine and inclusive dialogue. We have said dialogue, but now how, where, who?
Dr. Arrey William, you are a lecturer of peace and conflict studies at the Protestant University of Central Africa, and it was a pleasure to have you as guest on the program Political Focus.
Thank you very much for having me. It was really my pleasure.
And that is where we will end today's edition of the program Political Focus, in which we had contributions from Charles Tembe and Sam Bukuba. Our sound technician was Caroline Waite, while supervision was by Wayne Pohonkam. For presentation in Yaoundé, I have been your host, Samson Websi, thanking you for listening, and goodbye for today.